meeting. Thank you very much. It is now 2:11. This is the Audits Government Efficiency Committee meeting for Tuesday, July 26th. I'm Councilmember Zine. Councilmember Englander is joining me, and our third member is Councilmember Parks. We have 3 items on the agenda, all dealing with photo red light program. So we will begin with item number 1, Mr. Clerk.
Good afternoon, Council Member. Item number 1 is a City Controller report relative to the audit of the photo red light program and additional follow-up correspondence. This item is scheduled for Council on July 27, 2011.
And we will then call forward Controller's representatives. Go ahead, take a seat, please. Take it away. Identify yourself and comments.
I'm Terry William Newman, known as Will amongst my colleagues here. I'm honored to be here in a formal capacity today. The Controller's Office issued its report in the...
You're with the Controller's Office?
I am. I work with the Controllers for the Audit Division.
Okay.
Our office issued its report on the audit of the photo red light program on September 29th, 2010. The overall audit objective was to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of the city's management of the photo red light program. The audit included an assessment of how the city ensures the adequate performance of the vendor and how the city evaluates the status, problems, or successes of the program. We also reviewed leading practices and assessed whether the city achieves the program's goal of reducing traffic collisions. The audit covered 3 years ending October 31, 2009, and we also considered some conditions and data that extended through March of 2010. Summary of the results: we noted that the current vendor is performing adequately and LAPD's oversight was generally appropriate. However, we found that the program cannot conclusively demonstrate that it has reduced traffic collisions, thereby increasing public safety. And the city incurred a net cost of $1 million or more in both 2008 and 2009, the scope of our audit. Some of the key findings are as follows. The method used to select photo red light locations eliminated some high-risk intersections. We noted location decisions did not involve an engineering analysis to formally document the city's consideration of other non-enforcement solutions that may have had a more direct impact on public safety. As measured and reported by LAPD, the photo red light program has not conclusively shown to have increased public safety, and it may not be the sole reason for a reduction in traffic collisions as reported. This is due to several factors. For example, without a formal engineering survey and benchmarking, it is questionable whether declining numbers of collisions are due solely to automated enforcement. There has also been a wide fluctuation in the reported collisions at photo red light intersections, starting from a high of 107 in 2004, gradually declining to a low of 30 in 2008, and then rising to 46 in 2009. Citywide traffic collisions have declined by 14%, or had declined by 14% over the 2 years ending in December 2009, according to a police department CompStat report. As indicated, the program's operating costs exceeded its revenue. Our audit disclosed that the program has not provided additional revenue to the city. The city's share of citation revenue is only about 1/3 of the fine amount, and many citations are either never paid or adjudicated without a payment due. The city received $2.3 million in 2008 and $3 million in 2009. I think that's been well worked over. However, based on a conservative estimate of costs, the photo red light program actually cost the city approximately $1.5 million in 2008 and $1 million in 2009. In summary, the audit contains 16 recommendations, some of which were also directed to the Department of Transportation. LAPD submitted an initial response to the audit in December 2010 and generally agreed with the recommendations. We accepted the department's proposed action plans with some clarification on a few of the recommendations to ensure the audit issue would be mitigated.
We're joined by Councilmember Bernard Parks. Thank you, Councilman. So that's the report from the controller that was done, released September 29, 2010, covered 3 years. Was there any correlation between major injury collisions, fatal collisions, and the establishment of the photo red light? In other words, 10 people killed here, 5 people killed here, no people killed here. Any correlation between that and the establishment of the locations for the photo red light?
Well, in our review, we saw that some of the intersections that had higher numbers of collisions or fatalities, injuries, were not selected for photo enforcement.
Why?
And as was explained to us and demonstrated to us, they were interested in having citywide coverage. It's a large organization, and there are a lot of people involved, people who move from bureau to bureau, and so they were wanting to bring the courts on board, get the bureaus with a balanced number of, and the council districts. They wanted one camera at least in every council district.
So it was done on a political level more than a safety level?
We found that there was a very significant emphasis on making sure that there was at least one camera, one intersection with cameras monitoring it in every council district.
Regardless of where people were getting injured or killed?
Well, there were higher numbers of deaths and injuries in some of the intersections that were not selected.
Because I can clearly recall, as a member of the Public Safety Committee, where it was emphasized, where they established those locations, and it didn't matter what council district or what part of the city, but where people are getting killed and injured, that's where they were supposed to put those photo red light enforcement to save lives, not on a political environment, so every council district or every part of the city receives their share. And that was clearly stated in a Public Safety Committee that it be established that way. And that was a number of years ago. Obviously, that wasn't carried out from what the audit showed.
I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. The aspect of engineering, so there was not engineering analysis as part of this process?
Well, they described to us a collaboration with the Department of Transportation, and that meant that one senior person had 10% of his time allocated to this program. However, I've reviewed quite a bit of documentation related to this subject, and I would say that was less than what other jurisdictions might have suggested would be adequate. There was no funding for the Department of Transportation, so they did this on a shoestring, and they helped out. The $1.57 million they funded the infrastructure with, the improvements at all those 32 intersections. They took that out of their own budget. So there was no money coming to the Department of Transportation from the ticket revenue specifically for this purpose.
So it didn't appear to be a cost neutral. It cost the City of Los Angeles dollars to fund the program where there was no cost neutrality.
That's correct.
Okay. The issue of has not increased public safety, that was reflected by the police department where they stated that it did not increase public safety?
Oh, I don't think that's the way I would word it. The numbers and the documentation that we had were insufficient to allow us to draw the conclusion that what they're saying about public safety is accurate. In other words, when we had wide fluctuations in the traffic volume and congestion is a contributor to accidents.
It reduces accidents.
It increases it as there is higher congestion and people are frustrated. They tend to go through the intersections more aggressively. And as congestion is reduced, when you have high fuel prices, has an exponential impact on the collisions. That was not considered as a reason for why the collisions had reduced or the deaths had reduced. Although the CompStat report shows a 14% reduction for a 2-year period in collisions, when we asked them whether they considered that, as they said, well, the 32 intersections under the photo red light program are doing great, they didn't, well, the fact that there were other reductions didn't seem to factor into that explanation. So at the end of the day, we saw that there were a number of things that should have played a role in determining what we would call a metric. How many collisions per 1,000 vehicles transiting an intersection, or 10,000 vehicles? That was a very common metric that we didn't see here in the city. We saw it at in other jurisdictions, and in published reports, it was harped on over and over. Very volume through to consider the collision statistic.
Now, who made the final determination of the 32 locations? Was it DOT? Was it the police department? Was it the vendor? Who made that final decision? It's going to go at intersection A and B versus C and D.
That decision was a collaboration between LAPD and LADOT. The Department of Transportation people that came in after there had been a filtering and a winnowing of the number of intersections from thousands down to 200 and then down to 88, and then those 88 had been looked at by LAPD and DOT. It was at that point, when there's 88 intersections left, where you start to see the involvement of LADOT to say, basically to say there are no engineering activities that are planned to mitigate problems at these intersections. So it was more of a negative confirmation. It looks good to us. We don't see any reason why not to do that. That was my impression of what was going on. They had technically knowledgeable people who did look at these intersections. I went over and looked at some of the drawings, and you could tell that they had gone to the wall to make sure that these things were installed correctly. But the time invested prior to the final decision was mainly by the police department, less so by the Department of Transportation.
And who compiles the statistics on major injury and fatal collisions?
The police department accumulates data as collisions occur and police officers respond, and that data is accumulated on highway patrol forms, and then some of the data off of those forms is keyed into an ad hoc access database that they maintain at each of the 4 bureaus.
So at any one time, the chief of police or designee could look up citywide and say, we've had so many fatalities, so many major injuries, and this is where they're occurring. They could actually plot those.
They can, yes, and there's 2 systems that they use to do that. One is more focused on this subject, and the other is a citywide system for people who need a traffic report or a collision report, and they have access to it through this other system.
So they have all the statistical ability in the current system.
They have the data. They don't capture all of the data off of the forms. Was one of the issues we noted. For example, the number one thing that photo red light should be trying to mitigate is broadside collisions, T-bone collisions. They didn't.
Car going through a green light, car going through a red light, and they collide.
4 seconds, 10 seconds after the light changes, that kind of a collision is deadly. They don't track broadside collisions. They don't capture it off. They haven't in the past. They have agreed to do that in the future, but in the past, that was on the back of the first page of the Highway Patrol form. They did not code that into their database.
And do you have a law enforcement background?
I'm a certified fraud examiner.
Okay.
I have not a law enforcement background in a
I'm
formal
familiar with
sense.
those reports, and you're very knowledgeable about those reports, those CHP reports, where they take the collision investigations. The average person wouldn't have that in knowledge.
I have an interest in the subject, and I paid a little more attention, obviously, during the audit to those forms. My nephew is a highway patrol officer.
Oh,
so
okay. All right. Could have joined the LAPD, but he joined Highway Patrol.
I talked to him about it.
It's all right. So what we're finding is that from the auditor's report, it wasn't cost neutral, it was costing us money, and it wasn't generating the reduction that we'd anticipate. And one more question I have on the photo red light, 90+% for right turn violations?
I wouldn't say it was that high, more like 2/3.
2 out of 3 for right turn.
2 out of 3 for right turns, and in one of their responses, they indicated that they didn't know of any studies that focused on that, and in our report, one of our references was to a federal study on crossing path collisions, as they're called, and very carefully analyzes straight through, right turn, left turn, so forth. So yes, that's a big issue.
And where do they find the majority of the collisions at an intersection, a traffic control intersection? What type of violation?
Well, I'd have to look in the report to draw that statistic out of my head. I don't remember right off the top of my head, but there's a little table in the report, and I could probably flip to it here if you wanted me to take a minute.
Yeah, no problem.
On page 29 of the report, it says LAPD traffic collision statistics related to the automated photo red light program, citywide totals based on the 32 program intersections. And you see the table at the top of that page accumulates data on years 2004 to 2009. And it has total collisions in the next to the left column, 1,986 over the course of those 6 years. And these are at these 32 intersections. Red light related is the 21453A violation, and that's in, you can see the column there if you have this report available.
Yes.
And it shows the numbers from 107 dropping down to 30, and then it jumps up to 46. And if I were to look carefully, I think you'd see that that was the year when there were high fuel costs. The lowest year was when there were, so part of the decline might be attributed to other things that we hadn't measured. The left turn, 21801A, I'm sure Officer Greg here, who is in the audience, can explain these much better than I. Speed is 22,350, and following too close, FTC is 21,703. So it shows the numbers there, and remind me of your question. Have I answered your question? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm looking at, for the red light, it 107, 99, 69, 50, 30, 46, and then left turn, 21801A, 122, 113, 98, 104, 130, 116, and then speeding 107, 112, 110, 111, 135, 119. It doesn't seem to affect speeding much at all. From 107 to 119, it actually went up. And then following too close, 40, 27, 20, 37, 43, and 41. So the numbers seem pretty consistent over the period of time.
Well, one of the questions that we raised, and I'm not an expert on reporting and on collisions. We did our audit. We came in. These are numbers that they gave us. But one of the questions that we raised was that the level of there could have been more precision in the way things are both measured and in the goals that are established, the metrics that are established. This is what we're trying to accomplish here. For example, one of the issues that came up was violation rates. Now that's different from collision rates,
right,
but violation rates. And when we would bring this up, and in fact in their formal response, they say, well, we don't know who's coming through. They might have been through living in the neighborhood, or maybe not. And yet I have a study probably right here in front of me that I could quote you where they make a big deal out of saying that's a very important indicator. It's not the telltale indicator, but it's an important way of measuring when you should enforce with automated enforcement, or when you should consider this or this or this. And I just was surprised that there wasn't a higher level of interest in those kinds of sophisticated reports. I was surprised.
Which would have a long-lasting effect, you would think.
You would think it would be the basis for making decisions in this regard, yes.
Well, I know Mr. Englander has some questions, and then Mr. Parks. Mr. Englander.
Thank you. And, well, you answered a lot of the questions that I had, so thanks for taking my notes, Mr. Zine.
Well, thank you for spreading them over onto my side of the table. Thank you.
The, actually, when was the audit conducted? What was the time period?
It was, let me look right here, we say right in front of the report. In fact, it's in my notes.
It
Let me
was
just
released
look it up.
September 29, 2010. That's when it was released.
Yeah,
Yeah, when was it
it
conducted?
said,
It said 3 years.
covered 3 years ending October 31, 2009. I believe we finished the field work at a date that would be in the report, and I'd have to flip to it. Sorry that I don't have it on the tip of my tongue. It'll be on page, May 26, 2010 was the date we finished our field work.
But the statistics are on the exhibits go back to 2009.
Right, 2008 and 2009. I think that
So
was,
it sounds like it was concluded somewhere around 2009, perhaps then the evaluations were being written between that period of time and May of
well, we worked on this audit for at least 6 months, maybe, I'm sure it was longer than 6 months. And so we're accumulating data through that process, and we did focus on two calendar years, and those years ending December of 2009. That's why this 14% decline is a 2009 ending.
Okay. Was the information obtained for the audit provided solely by LAPD and DOT, or did you also get information from the vendor on these 32 intersections based on all this information in the audit?
We obtained information from the vendor and from the court through the vendor.
Okay.
The payment statistics and the fact that, and that's when we started uncovering the fact that there was a significant shortfall in the revenues that we had been under the impression that this program was generating.
And
from the court.
I understand that this has gone through 2 vendors in this one particular contract. The first vendor was insolvent, something happened, they went bankrupt?
That's correct. They were Rhode Island based and they went bankrupt.
And the new vendor took over,
They actually,
assigned the contract, or bought the old company? I wasn't sure exactly the details of what happened with that.
it was in, I want to say September of 2009, the former vendor, Nestor Traffic Systems, they didn't go bankrupt. They entered receivership.
Receivership.
And it was in that arena that ATS stepped in the LAPD's explanation to me. They were very happy that that occurred because that meant the cameras would stay on and the city's investment would not be wasted.
City's investment, I'll come back to that. So in the 2009, and it appears that the statistics that were cited in the audit went through 2009. So most of these statistics that are covered under these 32 intersections from 2004 to approximately 2009 were based on the previous vendor?
Right.
Okay. Do we have any new information, or have we updated the audit to see if there's been any significant change with the new vendor that was assigned?
Well, the new vendor takes over in September, so there was September through December of that year. And as we mentioned as I started today, we did look at some data up through March of 2010.
Right.
And just today, I received from the court an update on the revenues that we've been receiving,
Okay.
which I'm sure has been reported elsewhere. And so we're comfortable with the numbers that we've seen.
I hadn't seen that information. If you've gotten new information today, I don't think I've gotten it yet. And then on the investment, you'd mentioned, and I was interested to see if there was a breakout and a differential between the previous vendor and the existing vendor, but I don't know if there's a report on that. But on the investment, you mentioned the city's investment, and what type of investment did the city make into the system, other than just hiring a contractor to go out there and install the equipment, do the engineering. Perhaps they had to tear up sidewalks and put in electrical, put in the cameras. It sounds like the investment, we own all of that and we've done all the work, or the vendor did. What was the history on that?
Well, this particular contract was a little different from what the vendor said they usually do. The city wanted to do the infrastructure work to get the mounting points ready for the cameras. So we, not knowing how cameras worked in the same way that the vendor did, we worked with the vendor, the city, DOT, I'm speaking for them in this sense, worked with the vendor to design the attachment points and all the cabling and the electric and the data. There has to be a cable that hooks up to the internet, kind of like your home PC does. They spent $1.57 million was LA DOT's expenditure in that regard to set up these intersections. Now, when this latest contract started in 2006, there were already 16 intersections that had the former vendor's cameras on them, and they had to change that. And
Okay, so changing that over on those 16, was that included, or was that over and above the $1.57 million?
As I recall, and I would defer to DOT on that one, but I have the list here. There were, out of the 16, only 9 or 10 of those were selected for this new 32 series of intersections.
But all that equipment came out anyway, is what you...
Yes, so some of the, I'm assuming that the power supply and the cabling might have stayed. I don't know.
Okay.
So
we're in it for at least $1.5 million just to install new equipment. And these how many cities, do you know how many cities in the United States actually have a photo red light program?
I wouldn't want to quote a number without knowing exactly. I'm guessing it's in the hundreds. Probably a couple of hundred.
Couple hundred cities. And do you know if any of those couple hundred cities have any out-of-pocket investment into their photo red light program, or are we unique? My question is, has any other city in the United States spent a dime in investment other than the city of Los Angeles of actually installing a vendor's equipment at their intersections for this program?
I couldn't answer that. That's not something that if I thought about it, I might remember a reference that I could go look up if you'd like me to. But that would be a stretch for me to, as an auditor, to make a statement like that.
I'd asked that question yesterday in the Budget Committee, and the answer that I got then, that's why I was curious to know if you had any other information and had a different response on that. From what I was told, we were the only city. The city of Los Angeles was the only city in the United States out of all these cities that had a dime in investment and spent a dime on actually installing their own equipment, a vendor's equipment.
I recall reading a quote from our vendor, ATS, where they said that we are the only city that they have dealt with where this situation occurred. But don't quote me on that.
And the reason I was asking and going in this direction was there's also, and I guess we'll get to that in another part of this cost of removal, but my question was on the cost, and you said the city was losing money. Is the $1.57 million, and it sounds to me that there certainly could be a lot more in expenses and investment in that, is that amortized into this entire calculation of cost recovery of the system, or is that taken out?
No, we selected a 4-year amortization for that based on the length of the contract, and that was factored in our report, the overall net negative revenue that was coming to this, that the city was out of pocket on. And that was part of the reason that I termed it an investment. When we put in the infrastructure costs, that's a sunk cost. When you're now spending money, $1 million each year, that period of time was a ramp-up period. It took them over a year to get all the cameras online, all 32, and then it took them additional effort working with the vendor, Nestor initially, and then with ATS it was just hammering to get those, what they called the citation issuance rate, up to 80%, so that the vendor got paid and the city was seeing the citations, the system working like it should. And as those numbers of citations grew, then you're going to have more money coming in. So the first couple of years you're deep into pocket, And the idea of an investment is, as time goes by, hopefully the safety factors are being achieved, the safety goals are being achieved, but at the same time, the revenue from this system is also producing a benefit to the.
So it was a 4-year amortization, which means that now the numbers, that part of the amortization table is taken out, where we're not measuring the cost of investment, if you will,
No.
anymore?
No, I wouldn't say that, no. The amortization term that we used was 4 years based on the useful life, based on the contract term. If this contract were to be extended, then we would re-amortize it over a period of 4 or 5 years,
Okay.
as it would be right now.
However, those are fixed dollars that had already been spent.
They've already been spent.
Well, that's
Mr. Parks?
Thank you very
Just-
much.
Just want to
Is there
Go
someone
ahead,
here?
Mr. Holmes.
Just want to note that Fareed Safar is here with me. He's our Director of Auditing.
You're bringing in the A-team now, huh?
Well, he's my backup.
Okay.
I'm his backup, really.
Mr. Parks?
I was wondering if there's someone here from the police department?
There.
And what is this, the sergeant that's followed this program all the way through?
McWillie?
Yeah,
Sergeant McWillie.
well, yeah. You know, one thing, and I'm listening to the information, and it seems like I was in a different T committee when this was being proposed, based on the audit. And I think from listening to your assumptions, it appears different than the direction we gave the department. And I throw out a couple of things and see if you can refresh my memory. If I remember correctly, and I think one of your assumptions was that, or at least your responses was that this technology could not be attributed to be the sole reason for the reduction in the traffic accident. If I remember correctly, they told us that from the beginning, as far as LAPD, that the technology was an aid or a technology, but it was not the sole reason for traffic reduction. Am I accurate or close, or from LAPD? Is that what we were told?
Let me I'm Commander Blake John, Assistant Commanding Officer of Counterterrorism and Special Operations Bureau. I brought some experts from Emergency Operations Division that can answer that question for you.
Officer Michael Gregg, I'm with the Photo Red Light Unit. I've been with the unit since 2008, and I was also part-time with the Photo Red Light Unit under ACS since 2002. And yes, the department's assertion is, as much as I can speak for them, is that the traffic statistics prove a correlation, but not necessarily a causation. In other words, you see a decrease, and that's what you want to see when you install cameras, but it can always be attributed to other factors.
So that was part of the premise that you brought us the program with?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The other one I remember is that it was never intended to be in the sense of creating revenue, and in fact, there was a state law that prohibited revenue generation.
That is correct, sir. The primary goal of the program was the police department sees it as our job to enforce the law, and it was a force multiplier to allow officers to enforce a citation that is otherwise very difficult to enforce and frankly doesn't get very much attention from field enforcement.
Okay, and the key is that by state law, we couldn't create a situation that created revenue, and in fact, you couldn't even be cost neutral. So the expectation was it was going to cost more for the system than what we were going to get out of it.
Correct, sir.
Okay.
The same as an officer in the field.
Okay.
He's there to write tickets, not necessarily.
And if I remember, in one of the reports, the chief said that human beings as officers write about 7% of their the tickets at red lights. So we were not getting the same kind of contribution from motor officers or field officers on red lights.
That's absolutely correct. The field enforcement writes about 12,000 citations for red light a year compared to the photo red light program, which is an average of about 45,000. So by introducing 32 intersections, we quadrupled our red light enforcement.
Okay, so we basically use it as a tool in an area that we thought were the more serious violations.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The other one I remember, and it's in the chief's letter, that the city council approved the 32 locations.
That was my recollection, but I was part-time back then, but that was my recollection
Okay,
as
and
well.
if I remember in T committee, we were told that the 32 intersections were going to be selected by council area in which the council district's highest concerns would be dealt with, but they would be in no way related to citywide high-volume intersections. It would be by council district as opposed to picking the top 32 in the city. It was looking at maybe the top 2 within each district.
Exactly. They chose the intersections with the most collisions within that council district unless there were engineering issues or other factors in which we wouldn't be able to put a camera there.
Okay. And then the other one I remember, the first generation of the technology was just going through the red light, and later the technology came about to where right turns were able to be picked up.
Yes, under the ACS system, they didn't have video, so you can't prove a right turn with no video. They only had a before picture and an after picture, but as the technology improved, we were able to incorporate video and thereby apprehend red light right turn violators as well.
And I think we applauded that new technology because we
Yes,
thought
sir.
it was an enhancement.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
All right, and then the other thing is LADOT was here. I think they mandated to the city that they wanted to install the equipment.
Yes, that was done also as a cost-saving measure. When we installed the cameras, the vendor reduced the monthly fee that they would have otherwise charged us.
Okay, but I mean, that wasn't something they imposed on us. That's something that DOT came forward and said, because of our cameras and our ADSAC and all the issues with our with our own lights, we absolutely wanted to be the engineers and the installers of the equipment.
Yes, sir. My impression, they're very protective of their lights.
So I ask those questions because those assumptions in your report, if these are accurate and this is what we've given them, kind of get skewed results if we have different assumptions and different expectations. And I think that's what I remember sitting through numerous T committees and city council, and it was clear that I remember that the council was made aware of how they were broken down. They were made aware it was by council district. And I think, I'm going back in history now, but I think we talked about 32 with the expectation at some time getting to 60 or 70. And the expansion was going to be by citywide critical intersections, not the original 32.
Correct.
Okay, so that's what I remember about the program. And I'm getting older and I don't remember as well. But that's what I remember them being given the task to do. And if we go back and look at it, if that's not part of the assumptions in the audit, it gives us a skewed view of what their performance is. And that's what I'm concerned about, is that we're trying at this late date to make this program different than what we gave them the charge to do. And I think that's where it gets confused in the community, because if you look at what we asked them to do, they've done exactly what we asked them to do. They went out and found 32 intersections. They broke them down by council district. They got the highest volume per council district. They clearly told us it was going to cost money. They clearly told us it was not the only tool. And they also told us the machinery was going to be a higher volume of activity than human beings. And this technology did not have a pension, a IOD, a workers' comp, or any other funding. It was just paying for the use of the equipment. And I think that's what they came back and showed us as it relates to the program. So I'm just a little concerned that the assumptions of the audit are different than what we crafted and gave them the directions to do. So thank you for validating my memory.
Thank you, sir.
He's much younger than you.
I know, but I'm glad he remembers.
The focus is on the controller's audit on this particular item number 1. How long has it been a volunteer pay program? At one time, did the courts actually issue information to DMV and insurance and credit, et cetera, or how long has it actually been on the volunteer pay program, where you don't pay, no consequences, you pay, they collect?
The institutional memory of the court is short, and generated.
Obviously, Mr. Parks, you're not on the bench. The court's memory is short, unlike yours.
Oh, no, Try to remember.
We're in the same boat. Just getting the information that we did obtain was difficult, but, and I want to thank Sergeant McWillie of the Police Department who assisted us in that regard. I don't know how far back, but my assumption would not be adequate here, so I would just say we know that it's not at the time we did our audit.
When I became aware is when the news conference took place with the controller, where it was then publicized, and that was sometime after September 29th, 2010, that it was a volunteer pay program. All that time, I thought there'd be consequences the same as if you received a citation from an officer. There would be a follow-up with DMV, there would be a follow-up with the insurance, there would be some type of consequences. So I'm trying to figure out how long the program has been volunteer.
I would say since the beginning of the contract, or at least back 2 years.
The
So
first contract or the second contract?
The Nestor contract.
The Nestor, okay.
I don't know that it's ever been anything other than that, but I did not dig into that.
Okay.
So what I would say is I looked at the data very carefully. We downloaded a lot of court data that they provided. And as we looked at the data, we could see that there was no, we had been told that these tickets would go to the DMV and then people would be paying. So we went back and looked at the early tickets to see whether there was a follow-up adjudication in favor of the city or the payment of a payment. And that wasn't occurring, significant numbers. There were just a very small percentage of the early tickets that were resulting in revenue in the later years that would corroborate this statement that the DMV was going to force them to pay at some point. And it was in that process, we were moving some dirt with our Caterpillar at this point. And
This was found out by accident.
it wasn't an accident. It was a part of a process of digging into data and asking questions and continuing to ask. And at some point, we're looking at somebody in the eye and we're saying, what about these numbers? And it was at that point that Sergeant McWillie came to me and he said, I just talked to the court and they've explained to me that we're not turning these numbers or these citations into the state.
And you mentioned you received court information that we're not aware of. The dollars is the revenue collection or something. You made some comment on that when Mr. Engler was asking questions. You get some information today from the court about...
Right. We have, well, the vendor, ATS, submits data to the court. They generate the citation number themselves in their system. It goes to the court, and the court does whatever they do with those citation numbers, and then they give a CD back to the vendor that the vendor could load into their system. That was one of our issues. Well, if you have the data, why don't you give a reconciliation to LAPD? They weren't doing that. And so the data that they were giving back, we asked for 1 year's worth of that data. I'm going to say 1 year, but we did have an extended period of time, and we put it into our system. We have a system to analyze data, a database system. And in analyzing the data, we could see that there was something not adding up. There was not a lot of stuff happening after 2 or 3 years. In fact, it was dropping off precipitously. Is that answering your question?
Well, I don't know if they gave you a dollar value. On 10 citations, how many are paid? Out of 10 citations, are 5 paid and 5 neglected, or is it?
Oh, yeah, well, I have the numbers in my notes. The number that I would quote you was less than 50% or approximately. So
About half are paying and half are just letting it go.
Well, I don't want to step off into the area where I haven't a solid foundation. What I would say is some of the citations are paid, others are, the judge says you can't afford it and I'm going to let you have community service, things like that. So there's a lot of things that happen besides just pay the $500.
But if you don't pay it, there are currently no consequences.
Well, that's absolutely correct. I've spoken with the court about that at some length, and they're not going to change that, according to them.
Right. And how long cameras at the locations? Are the cameras we're talking about, have they been at the same static location for the last 5 years? Or has there been any movement?
No, I don't know of any change where they took one down and moved it to a different location. The vendor has talked some about that, but that hasn't happened.
And were there any upgrades from the 16 to 32? Any upgrades in the system? Did your audit find?
They knocked out 6 or 7 of them. I think they wound up with 9 or 10 of the original, and they put in the new equipment at those intersections. and then they rolled out the rest of the 32. Does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Were we leasing those, or did we purchase those?
The equipment, the infrastructure was our investment, and then the contract requires the vendor to put their cameras and equipment and to monitor those locations, the hardware, on an ongoing basis. They own that equipment.
Okay, so we're not leasing that?
No,
Okay. So that's all equipment owned by ATS?
that's correct.
And what about maintenance? Did your audit find any expense on maintenance of the system?
That's the responsibility of the vendor.
Were we charged for that?
It's part of what we pay for when we pay our monthly $8,125 for each intersection.
Okay, and to the officers, was this run out of the traffic divisions, or was this run out of a separate operation within the police department?
It was run out of the traffic coordination section, but most of the officers that worked the photo red light unit were assigned to the traffic division so that they could interact with the court and the public and be spread throughout the city. But they're technically under the umbrella of traffic coordination section.
And how many personnel were assigned?
It's
to-
fluctuated over the years. Started out as 4 officers. At one point, it went up to 6 officers, and is currently at 3, with a sergeant 2 as OIC.
And mentioned 45,000 citations a year. Did the audit reflect that there were 45,000 citations processed a year for the 32 locations?
Yeah, the number was about 44,000, 45,000 per year, as I recall. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
I have their numbers here if you want the exact number, but that's close enough.
What's close to the ballpark, about 45,000?
Yeah.
And currently outstanding for collection, how many?
When we finished our audit, it was at about 50,000 citations, as I recall, and there was an aging that I had done to show how old some of those citations were, how many of them were 6 months, 8 months, 12 months old. But yeah, there was about 50,000 citations. I think that's gone up a little bit by now.
There's about 50,000 that are currently out there that haven't been paid.
At that time, yeah, it's been a while since we finished
So
this
there may be
report.
more now.
Oh, there may be more. Probably are more.
And the court obviously doesn't really concern itself with any kind of collection on that.
No, not at all.
Did your audit also reveal on the cost breakdown how much the city receives, the state, the county?
Yes,
That's
that's
fine.
that's in our report. It's the city's portion is $157 at that time. At the time we finished our audit, and
On a $480 violation, $157 goes to the city, the rest goes to the state and the county.
the state gets somewhere over $200, $250, $280, something like that, and the county gets some. The court gets some.
Okay.
I have breakouts on that are very detailed. If that's something you're interested in.
I'm just trying to get some estimates on those numbers. Mr. Englander, before we move on, any other questions?
Just a couple for LAPD. Just for clarification, I'm just trying to understand this. And Mr. Zine had used the word voluntary citation.
Voluntary pay.
Voluntary pay. Is this a legal citation under the view of LAPD? Are they legally being cited at some point in this process when they're issued the citation?
The department and the court agree that it is a legal notice to appear, and if you fail to respond to it, it does go down in the court system as a failure to appear. It doesn't disappear. The only difference is that they are not notifying the DMV, whereas they would normally do that on a regular citation. But it is still legal, and it's still a failure to appear.
So it's not a frivolous citation. It's a real ticket. I mean, it's a real notice to appear citation.
It's a court order, sir. Yes.
Court order. So the court order is, okay. And if they fail to appear, you say it goes down as a failure to appear. What does that mean?
The court has its own internal system. So, for example, if you were to ever go to the court window, perhaps you were cited by another officer or something like that, and you go to the window, they would say, you have this system, this photo red light court failure to appear is still in our system. You got a red light ticket and you never came to court, and you need to take care of that. And they will tell you that that's still in their system. But it will not be on your DMV record. That's the only difference.
So it stays on the court record.
Yes, sir.
So if you got another ticket and something else happens, that'll trigger where they have to appear before a judge at that point?
If you are in the courthouse and they know it's you, they will advise you that you have an outstanding citation, and that's happened. I've met people where that has happened, and then they've come to court to resolve their photo red light citation because perhaps they didn't know about it, they changed addresses, et cetera.
Okay, and so if you've got a notice to appear on your record, what else, what other possibilities, what else can happen to you in the court system?
According to the court, they refer failure to appear on red light citations to their contracted...
I don't mean just for photo red light. I mean, if you have a failure to appear
Oh,
on your record with the court, what else could that trigger in any other situation?
Well, in the cases where you've promised to appear, in other words, you've signed a citation, there are other laws that come into play. They can put a suspension on your driver's license. It can go to a warrant. The collections will go to collections, et cetera. With a photo red light, it was written into the law that the most they could do is put a hold on your ability to renew your license. So it's not a suspension or a warrant. It's legally a separate category. So the court will notify the DMV. The DMV will say, when you go to renew your license, you need to take care of this ticket before you renew your license. But it would never go farther than that because there's no signed promise to appear. And that's what activates a lot of the bells and whistles in the full court press, so to speak, is when you sign saying, I shall appear, and then you fail, that's when you get your warrants and things like that.
And I understand that there's current state legislation pending to fix some of those problems. But I won't hold you to that because it's state legislation, the LAPD. So on that, with that, does the LAPD, does the City of Los Angeles consider this any kind of voluntary citation, or that people should not if they get one? In other words, we still even have the program is still in contract in the next few days. If somebody gets one of these citations, or they've just gotten one over the last month, and then they just opened their mailbox today, and they're tuning in and they're listening to this, what does LAPD suggest?
No, obviously our position is, it is a citation, and people are obligated to pay it and take care or challenge it the way that the system is set up. But as has been explained, the process much beyond that compared to a personal service citation where an officer writes you a citation is much different, so that the enforcement and the teeth are not there. But our official message is, if you get one, there's an obligation that be taken care of.
And the teeth on this that's a failure of our vendor to not follow through on this, on the collections, or is it the failure of the court system to not recognize it, or is it a process in the legislative language that doesn't allow for it, or is it all the above? Or?
Well, it's all of the above. Mainly the court's view of how they were going to treat that citation versus a citation that a police officer would write you.
Okay, so not the vendor, but the court. Right. And okay, I got it. All right, that's all I got.
Following up on what you stated, I'm driving your car. I go through a photo red light. You get the notice in the mail. You disregard that notice. I'm the one who's driving the car, and I don't tell you about it. And then you go down to court subsequent on another situation, and you're saying that the court is now going to say to you, you have an outstanding photo red light, which you know nothing about, and then you're going to say, I never received it, I never got any notice, and you're saying it's going to be on your DMV, or it's going to be held in the court somehow?
It will be in the court system as a failure to appear. The way the law was written, it's by law, the photo red light citation must go to the registered owner of the vehicle first.
Like a parking citation?
No, because it's actually tied to the registered owner's driver's license. We have to identify the registered owner by their driver's license and do a DMV match. And now that registered owner has been not necessarily say you are the driver, but you are required to appear, because we have a reasonable expectation to believe that you are the driver, and then accompanied with that citation is an affidavit where if you're not the driver, you can identify who it is.
You can, you're not obligated to.
There's no legal requirement to identify the driver. However, the legal requirement to appear in court still exists because it's a court order you shall appear.
So according to what you're saying, there's about 50,000 people who have that notice in court in Los Angeles County that haven't taken care of those citations. And if they go down to court to appear on another matter, and that is flagged through the court system of failing to appear, there's no consequences to that, except they tell them to go see the judge, or they set a court date, and then they go to court and say, I don't know about this, Your Honor, it wasn't me. I mean, I'm trying to figure this out, because what we have been told by the police department very clearly, it's a volunteer pay program. And the volunteer pay program, if you don't pay, once you get the notice from the collection agency, there are no consequences. Now you're saying something entirely different that the police department has never brought forward to this council or to this committee or to any other committee regarding these citations through the photo red light. This has never been stated by anyone, and the police department has testified in council, in committee, regarding the, quote, volunteer pay program. How long has this been out that no one's known about?
I don't know that the term volunteer pay program is...
That's a quote from Chief Downing, the volunteer pay
I don't know
program.
that it's a technical term, because there's a lot of nuances to what happens with these photo red light citations.
Well, the quote from the deputy chief or assistant chief, is he a deputy or assistant chief? Deputy chief, is it's a volunteer pay program.
What I do know, and this is per the court, that it's still a failure to appear in their system. And when I go to court, I meet with violators who will appear in court, and I say, well, what happened? Why are you here? And they said, well, I got a ticket from another officer. I went to the window, and they said I had this photo red light ticket I didn't know about. So here I am. I'm taking care of it now. And my understanding is that once the court notifies you of this citation, that they've given you notice. And so now there are additional teeth, so to speak, that would come in.
How come that was never brought out before to anyone? You work this section. This has been well publicized through the newspaper, through television, through radio. How come no one has brought this forward, this information? No one has mentioned anything about this until this moment.
Well, I can get, it's really more of a court question, and we've never really had anybody from the court testify, just people from the department. And since I am in court on a regular basis and interact with the court personnel and defendants, I think I just have first-hand knowledge. That would be my guess as to why.
So we've never had the court testify, but we've had representatives from the department testify a number of times on this particular situation. And at no time did anyone say, other than a volunteer pay goes to collection, if you don't take care of it, nothing happens. That was the statement over and over and over. This is a totally new scenario that was never been brought up by anyone at any time.
I don't believe the question has ever been asked if it still appears in the court database as a failure to appear.
Well, we were told the court doesn't do anything with it.
They don't notify DMV. They do refer it to collection. We've always said that.
Well, yeah, and that was it. And if you didn't pay it, then nothing would happen. They refer it to collection, and collection sends out the letter, and if you don't pay it, nothing would follow up. They wouldn't put a lien. They wouldn't put anything on you. You just, if you pay it, fine. If you don't, and according to the controller, there's over 50,000 that haven't paid it. So you're telling me that 50,000 people who have received someone in their car a photo red light, there's 50,000 in the court system right now, and if they go down there, then the court's going to quiz them on this. That's what you're saying.
My understanding of the court's procedure is that when a defendant shows up and they have outstanding cases, the court does advise them that you still have a court case that you haven't taken care of, and they give them notice at that time at the window. Yes.
Okay, we need to verify this before this goes to council tomorrow. This matter is scheduled to go to council tomorrow, which is, did you ever hear that from the auditor's controller's office? On a follow-up by anyone?
No, we have no information on that.
But I
Mr.
think,
Parks?
I think the officer's very accurate. I don't think anybody's asked that level of question. I think what we've been tied up with is what the pay issue is, and that's what's been answered properly. I don't ever remember anybody asking to give us a detailed view of what happens in court and the nuances between whether a promise to appear versus the issue of what a red light citation. This has been educational, but I don't think we've had that depth of questions in this specific area.
And I also think that, Chief Downing, if he used the word volunteer pay program, we're looking at this process in place for their photo red light tickets is significantly different than if an officer wrote you a ticket.
Oh, we know that. That's true.
Right, and so, I don't know if the fact that, a DMV hold not being placed or not being on your record, or if it's just sent to collection agency, I think in relation to the way we handle normal citations, it's significantly less than what would happen if you were written a ticket by a police officer. So, and, I'm sure in that respect that's what they were really looking at when they say volunteer pay program, because unless an individual would happen to be back in court, there's really no follow-up.
And how long does the court hold that?
That I don't know.
Okay, we need to find out between tonight and tomorrow morning for council what the status is with that situation, because that's dramatically different than what we've been telling the public. We've been telling the public information we received from the police department. So it's very clear that we need to, if make a correction, we will make a correction, whatever the status of that is. Because I was told that it's only in LA 32 locations. We don't talk about Beverly Hills and Culver City because that question was asked. We don't know what they do. But we were told clearly this is the 32 intersections in the city of Los Angeles. So we need you somehow between now and tomorrow to get this information clarified one way or another for the benefit of everybody. Anything else, Mr.?
Just a quick thing. On this, and it sounds like that, and we'll explore this, but the volunteer pay might have been, and I can't speak for him, an editorial comment rather than a matter of law or fact or position of the city or LAPD, but merely an off-the-cuff editorial comment. I would say that it doesn't appear that that's a lot of teeth. It might be a tooth. I don't know how many teeth. But having said that, a failure to appear is something that I would consider significant if it's on your record in the court system. It could also, I believe, come up under other cases having to deal with child custody, or if you've got failures to appear before a judge, those could be used against you in a lot of different areas. And I'd like to hear back tomorrow what that significance of a failure to appear could mean in other cases if that's just registered with the court. That to me would be very significant. I'd also like to know when we refer to collections, and it's been stated that we have no teeth in that they send one letter. What is the collection system? What is the collection rate? How does that compare to other collection systems with parking tickets? We're saying if collection systems on photo red light are at 60%, and that's the number that I understood in the audit, 60%. I understand that number is even higher than parking tickets. It was the 30% that was based on those that were sent to collections. So I'd like to know the numbers on that as well, if we can flush those out.
Okay, again, we're talking about the audit from the controller, and so we want to focus
That's the one I was talking about.
on that issue. So without any further questions, Mr. Parks?
Let me just ask one other. There was a comment made about 50,000 tickets that are in some form of limbo. Is that inconsistent with the number of warrants in general for traffic tickets as far as percentage?
I don't know that, and we're not sure. We could find out.
Yeah, I mean, because I think we have like, last time I remember, we had like 1 million plus traffic warrants out there doing something. And so that would give an indication that a lot of people don't quite get around to paying their traffic citations. I'd just like to figure out whether these, and using the figure 50,000, is that inconsistent with the normal percentage? Is it high, low? Is it insignificant? That would be interesting also.
What I can tell you is that once a photo red light citation goes to collection in the court, the GC services, that the collections on regular traffic citations with a signature versus photo red light in GC services is about twice as much. But those are just the citations that have been referred to collection, and the difference there is the DMV hold. The ones that have the DMV hold, twice is better.
Okay.
I have numbers from the court on that.
And when you use the term that the court has failure to appear, that doesn't automatically go to warrant. That's just the court record keeps it as a failure to appear.
Correct, yes.
So there's no warrant out for the 50,000 people who haven't followed up on their photo red light citations?
It's actually illegal to put a warrant for a photo red light citation. The best you can do is a DMV hold. That was written into the legislation.
Which they haven't done in LA.
Which they don't do, but they do in other counties.
Right, right. And that's the point that we've made. This is only pertaining to the 32 locations in the city of Los Angeles that they haven't done this with.
All the cities in the county. This is a court-wide county policy for LA.
Okay, well, I don't want to go to other jurisdictions because we've caused enough concern with just the LA situation, because the sheriffs have the photo light at the railroad crossings and our neighboring jurisdictions. I don't want to tread on someone else's territory that they may have a local court, even though they're state courts, that have a different policy. We just want to focus on this one and keep this. So as far as the controller's audit relative to the,
One other question.
Mr. Parks?
Could you just repeat that comment you made about what was illegal?
With photo red light citations, you cannot put a warrant, you cannot suspend somebody's driver's license. The legislation is written so that the teeth, so to speak, is a hold on your ability to renew your license. In other words, in 5 years, when you go to renew your license, you will not be able to until you respond to the notice to appear. And that's because there's legally distinct categories for those types of citations as a result of there not being a signature. There's no promise to appear, and it's the promise that activates a lot of the other things like the warrant and the license suspension and things like that.
Thank you.
So on item number 1, there'll be a recommendation, note and file, and move that item to council. I guess it's scheduled for tomorrow. So concurrence?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry, we do have a speaker card. Jay Beaver on number 1. We still have 2 remaining. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon, Jay Bieber, Safer Streets LA, Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council. There's a couple of things. Actually, this last issue on the failure to appear, as I was listening to this, it's still unclear to me. If you go to the window and they tell you that you have a failure to appear, do they make you do anything, or do they say, okay, you have a failure to appear, and then
We're gonna find
maybe
that
you
out.
walk away? But
We're gonna find
I think
that out.
that's a question. As far as the other things that were brought up in the controller's audit, the main crux of this whole issue, as far as whether there's been a safety improvement and whether it's been proven or not, is a question of whether or not there were other things that were done at the same time. We all know that the yellow lights and the all red faces were improved and lengthened at the same time these cameras were put in. So the cameras have not been proven to have improved any safety benefit to the city. As far as the engineering survey is concerned, it's really a question of whether, not only whether they did an engineering survey, but whether they implemented these things and then waited to see whether those things would have improved safety before they put in the camera. You need a lag time. You need to look at that and say, well, okay, we did these engineering improvements, safety's improved, we don't need the cameras. And that's been one of our major objections to this, to this program. As far as the rolling right turns, the number is about 75% citywide. In Councilmember Zine's district, it's about 97%. And as far as the number of accidents, they're very, very insignificant. It's in the 3/100,000th of a percent of rolling right turns actually cause an accident. And as far as the state legislation is concerned, the state legislature, there is actually no state legislation currently pending to change this. There was a recommendation from the city that a particular bill be amended, but that bill is in suspense and it may or may not ever be amended, so there actually is no particular legislation that's pending to change the may into a must.
Thank you. So with that recommendation, we will receive and file, note and file, item number 1. All right, so let's go to number 2.
Item number 2 is a Los Angeles Police Commission report relative to the audit of the photo red light program pursuant to motion Hahn, Koretz, Garcetti, and Zine. This item was also referred to the Public Safety Committee, and this item has also been scheduled for council for July 27, 2011.
Don't be shy, Mr. T. Fank.
Good afternoon, Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Board of Police Commissioners. Actually, this is the department's report. The transmittal is only from the commission. The report is actually the department's response to the audit. So the department, we better respond to the report.
And the official position of the police commission on this particular matter?
On the audit, sir?
On the audit and
Yes.
on the audit.
On the audit, the commission approved the department's report, and the recommended action for the commission from the department as it relates to the audit was that the Board of Police Commissioners review and approve the report in response to the City Council motion by Councilmember Hahn relative to the City Controller's audit of photo red light, Council File number 10502. The Board transmit the report to the Audits and Government Efficiency and Public Safety Committee, and that the Board approve the continuance of the photo red light program. That was as of the date of the report that came to the Commission is November 30th, 2010, and it was considered by the Board of Police Commissioners at their meeting on Tuesday, December 14th.
Mr. Englander?
My question on this, on the net loss that it states of $2.5 million on the program, does that account for the $1.5 million of investments the city made on installation of the equipment?
I can't respond to that, sir. That's the department's report. I don't have that specific information.
Do you know that then if that $2.5 million, I believe it did, but if it accounted, does that account for the total cost of the officers assigned to this unit?
To the best of my recollection, it does. Again, in the controller's audit, it identified the amounts of money that the program cost to operate.
Right.
And the department's report was in response to that. So in this report, I believe they do confirm those numbers. I've not looked at this recently because I was not prepared to respond to this, since it's actually the department's report and not the commission's report.
I see.
But as a matter of form, when the Board of Police Commissioners approves a police department report,
right,
all it gets attached is a transmittal that on such and such date the Board of Police Commissioners reviewed this report, and it gets forwarded. The clerk always agendizes it as the Board of Police Commissioners report, but in reality it is the LAPD's report.
I see. Do we have somebody from LAPD that can answer any of these questions?
Item number 2.
Got a couple questions on how we calculated the cost. Because it's been all over the press that we're losing money, the city's losing money, this is a poor investment, and I'm sort of just inheriting this now, but I do remember the arguments that were made when this program came to be. So my question is on this, it's a $2.5 million cost. Does that cost account for the original investment by DOT of $1.57 million to install the equipment?
Where are we referencing the $2.5 million?
That was the program impact on city finances relative to the report from the department. And those are in the CLA notes as well. So rather than just focus on the actual dollar amount, let's make it a little simpler if you can't find it right away. The numbers, oh, you got it? Okay, so the numbers that they're stating repeatedly throughout the media and throughout various committees, throughout council, is that the city of Los Angeles is losing $2.5 million on this program. What I'm trying to ascertain is if that's factual or how they got to that number, and if it's treated fairly across the board on all programs that the department operates. So the question is that $2.5 million part of the DOT cost of installation that was amortized? And it was stated earlier that we continue to change the amortization tables based on how often we expand the program or renew the contracts. And so there's always that cost. It never goes away. It just might shrink based on the amortization, but for whatever reason, it remains. So my question is that part of that figure?
Yes, that's on page 4 of the Commission's report. The Controller's audit found that the photo red light program has not covered its operational costs and cites a $2.5 million net loss over the last 2 years, which would be 2008 and 2009.
Okay, so we used that $1.5 million as part of that calculation. Okay. So with that, and I just, again, wanted to reiterate that the city of LA is the only city in the country, from my understanding, and that was stated on the record, that has actually installed their own equipment or a vendor's equipment at a cost of $1.5 million. The cost then of the officers as part of the program, how many officers were assigned to this?
These cost projections were used on a deployment of 4 P3s, 2 P2s, 1 Sergeant 2, and some civilian employees as well with the department, as well as a part-time 10% involvement of LADOT.
Okay.
When you added all that up, it was about $800,000 a year, but that's using the cap rate, which also takes into
I
account.
got it, right.
Yeah.
I know what a cap rate is. Okay, so if we add the cap rate, we add all those salaries in the installation of the equipment, that's what we're losing on the program. It's all on the city side. I'm just trying to figure this out. That's about $2.5 million, roughly.
Give or take, yes, sir.
Give or take. Okay. And those same officers, you'd stated earlier on the record that those same officers in the field can write citations per intersection. How many?
Well-
If officers were actually out there in the field writing citations, how many citations on average are written on an intersection?
All of our field enforcement, LAPD total, writes 12,000 citations a year. If you use an average, red light violations don't happen that frequently. If you look at our photo red light citations,
Okay.
it's 45,000 a year. But if you divide that by 32, you're looking at about maybe 4 red light violations in a 24-hour period, average. So conceivably, if you go by that average, if an officer's sitting at an intersection all day long, he might write at best 4. It can go up and down, but you're not looking at the kind of volume like speeding, for example.
Okay, so 4 or 5. And then when we look at do we ever audit the cost of having a police officer out on the street writing citations to how much it costs to have that police officer, the equipment, their uniforms, their ammunition, their weaponry, their training? Do we amortize that to see if citation writing on the street is cost effective?
Not to my knowledge.
We did do a cost analysis of what it would cost to enforce 32 intersections 24/7, 365 days a week.
A year.
A year.
I'm sorry.
We work 365 days a week, but there's only
No, we do,
365 in a, yeah.
Right, so we did a cost analysis that was submitted by the department within the last month or two, and it ended up being about 100 to 150 police officers.
150 police. So the cost-benefit analysis, what was the total cost? If we,
I believe it was somewhere around 35 million,
35 million.
something like that.
Okay. So with that, then, and we've got an outstanding rate. We've got about 50,000 or 65,000. I read in a report yesterday 65,000, but then it was stated today 50,000. We'll call it 50,000. Outstanding citations based on photo red light. But we're saying that there's an average of 45,000 citations, is what you stated on the record a moment ago, per intersection per year being written. That's roughly
No,
one.
no.
For the program.
For the entire program.
Yeah, not per intersection.
Got it. Never mind. Okay, I'll withdraw that last question. That's all I got. I was
45,000.
going to say, that's pretty remarkable. Okay.
And I will say that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 32 locations, there's no way we'd ever deploy personnel at the same location 24 hours a day and night, rain or shine. I mean, you don't have that kind of volume that obviously would reflect that.
We do
so-
have those kind of volunteers in CD12, though.
Yeah, do have those.
But I think that's exactly why they went to the technology.
Yes,
As you-
I'm not questioning the technology.
I got it. Okay.
I'm just questioning some other issues. You mentioned earlier 4 officers, 6 officers, now 3 officers, and then you mentioned to Mr. Englander about some civilians that were involved in this. So current status is 3 officers, any civilians, or just down to 3 officers?
The civilian calculation is really not realistic at this point. It might never have been.
We don't want to discount civilians because you got a lot of them sitting behind you.
They have teeth.
Well, that included, for example, the financial or fiscal operations division and the part that they would have played in the program, which, when it was originally conceived, they would have done all the accounting,
Oh,
so questions
okay.
about revenue, things like that. But their current, right now, all they do is they pay the bill. So there is really no, it's an absorbable cost. They don't really have a
Nothing
dedicated
special on it.
person.
You know,
Okay.
and the larger number of the 4 P3s and 2 P2s and the Sergeant 2 was what we are TO'd at for that unit. But obviously, you know, we're operating right now at something significantly less because we've had to move people around and we're carrying vacancies and things like that. So we noticed in the controller's audit that they calculated some sort of cost based upon 3 officers and mentioned that, we were adequately staffed to do the program like that. But I can tell you that a lot of these guys are doing double duty right now. It's probably not really the optimal way to operate. So I'd say the more realistic costs are what we were TO'd at.
Well, in a conversation with the chief yesterday, you're down 300 P3s, 70 sergeants, and a lot of other folks in the chain of command. So that's obviously a critical issue to make sure you got that balance. Mr. Parks?
Yeah, one question. On the 3 that we're talking about, does that count the people that are out in the traffic division? That also complement the photo red light? So that's the total?
That's myself, I'm one of the officers, and then there's an officer in the valley and an officer on the west side, who works west traffic, and those are the 3 officers, and then Sergeant Carmody.
Thank you.
And also, according to the report, there's outstanding citation revenue exceeds $7 million if it was all collected, but we know that some folks will opt for community service. So if we're looking at a true number, those citations outstanding, it would exceed 7 if every dollar would be collected. And it also states the LA Superior Court has advised it will not change its collection process. So I think there's been a lot of issues with the court trying to come on board with this, and for whatever reason, they don't want to do it. And I don't know the particular reason. They seem to be adamant that they're not going to be changed. And I don't know if the state legislature can order a judge to do something with the discretion of the court. So with that, I would recommend on item number 2, if there's no other questions, we note.
A real quick question on that, because that keeps coming up, that the LA Superior Court has advised it will not change its collection process.
Yep.
And I'm trying to figure out where that came. Who's the one that talked to the court? Do we have anything in writing from the court? I've never seen anything in writing
I've
from the
seen
court.
it in writing from the court, their spokesperson representative. It's in writing where they have stated clearly that that's the rule, they're not going to change it. And I've got that document.
At this time,
And we have
okay.
a very recent conversation.
Joining us now, a civilian.
Yeah, but the toughest civilian.
Yeah, she is
I'll tell you right now.
She is tough. June.
Hello, June Gibson with the CLA. I had a conversation with the senior administrator of the court, and
Recent?
yes,
Okay.
last week. And he expressed the court's position, which is representative of the presiding judge as well as the executive officer. It's my understanding that this has been a longstanding policy of the court. The reason they have this policy is because of the fact that the citation is issued to the registered owner. The court's position is one of fairness. Unless the individual appears in court and they are able to ascertain whether or not the registered owner is in fact the violator, the court does not believe that it is fair to punish the registered owner if the individual was in fact not the violator. They don't believe that it is appropriate to withhold license renewal for the registered owner if he was not the violator. The court does not believe that it is fair to send the information to the credit agency if the registered owner was not the violator.
What about the issue regarding the comment you made regarding failure to appear? Was that discussed at all?
No, that's new information, and I'm glad that the officer had provided the information to the committee. And I do agree.
That's a new twist to everybody.
Right, and I do agree that, having been present at all of the discussions with respect to this issue, the issue that was raised was the manner in which the question was raised, and that has to do with payment. The issue of the failure to appear has never been raised, and I think that that is an important point that the officer had provided to the committee.
And we need to verify and clarify and then resolve that issue at tomorrow's council meeting so we don't mislead anyone. Anything else, Ms. Gibson?
Should I stay here for item 3?
You should.
Okay.
Did we have any communication for the file on that? Did they send a letter memorializing any of the conversations or anything that I could review?
Actually, the court did provide a memo to the LAPD, which they provided to me, and it was on the basis of that memo that I followed up with the senior administrator who confirmed that that is the position of the court.
Okay, if there's any way that can be provided, apparently Mr. Zine's got a copy of it. I haven't
Yes.
seen it, just so I could review it and
Yes.
ask questions based on the letter as well. That'd be great at some point.
I will. I was just informed by my staff that a Times reporter, not a Times reporter, a CNS reporter? CNS reporter listening to our conversation called the court to verify information, and the court said they don't keep that information. So we need you to verify that for us tomorrow. But obviously a reporter already followed up on it, and the court says, no, that's not the case. So we'll get it clarified one way or another. So we've got 2 public speakers on this particular matter. Unless there's any other questions from my colleagues? No? Okay. J. Beasler, what, J, your last name? Bieber, okay. You write like a doctor. Hard to decide. Bieber, okay. And number 2.
Yes, on number 2. I just wanted to, Jay Bieber again, I just wanted to quickly mention that in the council file package for this is my response to the LAPD's response. It's extensive, it's point by point. I won't go through it now, but I would urge you to, if you haven't already done so, to look at it. It basically handles every single point that was brought up by the police department in favor of the program and reasons why that would not be correct. The main thing that I want to talk about real quickly is this issue of police officers and their deployment and how many it would take. And you cannot compare a camera to a well-trained police officer. Police officers do many, many other things other than write tickets. You can't compare the efficacy of a program to how many tickets are being written. Police officers are out on the street. They're affecting safety in many ways. They're looking for graffiti artists or people breaking into cars.
Graffiti vandals, not artists.
Yes, that's exactly right. Sorry. Those are the benefits to a police officer on the street. If these officers are redeployed, they would most likely be out on the street writing other citations, many of which would probably be adjudicated much more readily than the ones that are sent through the mail. So that is also not being taken into account in terms of the cost of this. Officers need to be doing things that are relevant to their training as opposed to sitting behind a desk and clicking a mouse and giving tickets all day long. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. And Charles Torito? Is that correct, Torito?
That's correct.
Okay, go.
Thank you, Councilman.
Number 2.
Number 2. Hi, my name is Charles Torito. I'm the Vice President of Communications for American Traffic Solutions, and I'd be more than willing to answer any of the questions that you have, but I wanted to address some of the issues that have been brought up during this discussion. Red light safety cameras have proven to be an effective tool and resource for law enforcement to use to save lives, and they do so by changing driver behavior. A question was asked earlier about how many communities nationwide use these cameras. There are essentially 600 communities nationwide utilizing red light safety cameras. Of those communities, ATS has 3,000 cameras currently operating. And we have them in almost every major city. Many of our cameras are in New York, Washington, D.C., places like Miami, Orlando, St. Petersburg, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Houston, San Diego, Seattle, Kansas City, St. Louis, many of the major metropolitan areas in the United States, and some of our other industry players have cameras in other cities as well. We believe that this is a program that has had a pretty good return on its investment. Our numbers show that 64% of the violations issued are actually paid. We've actually reconciled every violation issued with the tickets that have been paid or put forward by the LAPD. So we think that it has been treated as a very successful program. Another thing that we wanted to talk about very quickly is that the issue that was just brought up about the courts and whether or not they believed that someone should be held accountable for someone else driving their vehicle. The law already allows an option for those people. It's called submitting an affidavit of non-liability. You can sign a piece of paper that says, I wasn't driving, this is who was driving, and that person will be held responsible for the violation if indeed it wasn't you that was that the violation occurred. So those are some of the issues that I think need to be addressed and looked into a little bit further.
Thank you. And that's item number 2, so it'll be a recommendation on item number 2 to Mr. Parks. No comment, Mr. Englander, note and file number 2. Concurrence? Mr. Parks? Note and file number 2?
Yeah, fine.
Mr. Englander, okay, so that'll be direction number 2, note and file. And now number 3, please, read that for us.
Item number 3 is motion Cardenas Parks and a Chief Legislative Analyst report relative to the photo red light program. This item was also heard in Budget and Finance on Monday, July 25th. This item is scheduled for council on Wednesday, July 27th, 2011.
What was the recommendation in Budget and Finance on this item?
My understanding was that the believe it was to move the item forward to council to end the program in a phased
Face out?
program, correct. But Councilmember Parks could elaborate more on that.
Well, other than budget and finance, you two were there yesterday.
No, basically, it's his motion. Basically, it's the phase
That's
out,
to the
but
department.
we needed a
That's called-
negotiation to make sure that the city's concerns and potential liabilities were considered during the phase out.
So why don't we?
Well stated.
Why don't we hear from our civilian first?
I can provide some follow-up
Why don't
with
you tell us who you
respect
are?
to the
record.
committees. Oh, I'm sorry, June Gibson with CLA.
Thank you.
The committee had asked that we be in contact with ATS on an amendment to the contract to provide for a phase-out. We did have a conference call with LAPD, CAO, as well as the vendor. What we wanted from the vendor actually was an itemization of certain items that we thought was important in order to enable LAPD to put together the court packages. Primarily, they needed access to the video evidence that is maintained by ATS. We also asked that they provide a cost breakdown for training on accessing the signal duration logs. There were a couple of optional activities that we wanted them to provide a breakdown on. That was to maintain the website as well as to, for a limited basis, to maintain a call center until such time as the LAPD could provide to the public some general information through one of their phone lines. Unfortunately, based on the information that was provided to us by ATS, we did not get the breakdown that we had requested. The cost estimate that they provided to us was sort of a lump sum of all of the, what they call backroom support services for the first month, and then there's a drop-off for the subsequent months, and so we have not had the opportunity to contact them again to get a better understanding as to how the pricing was derived.
So the recommendations, I understand, in conversation, is that the Budget and Finance Committee was unanimous in their recommendation to discontinue the enforcement at the end of this month, and that there would be some process that would take place after that for a specific period of time. Are you aware of that?
Well, I was at committee yesterday, and certainly, you know, the chair as well as Councilmember Englander can tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the action by the committee was to turn the cameras off as of midnight, August 1st, but provide for a mechanism to the contractor to continue to provide services to the city to enable a phase down so that the city would still benefit from the outstanding citations that have been issued.
How long would that be?
Well, that's one of the issues that we have yet to decide. The contractor has proposed an 18-month period. We have not decided whether or not an
18-month period to collect the outstanding revenues?
Well, and that's, obviously, that's one of the outstanding issues that.
Let me ask you this.
we've discussed.
From the time a citation is issued to a violator goes to the collection agency, how long does it take to get to the violator?
I'm
Or to the
to-
registered owner of the car? You commit a violation today. This is Tuesday. How long until that is processed through the police or DOT or whomever, where request is mailed out to that individual to say, this is the violation, here's your photograph, you pay $480 some. That period of time, how long is that?
My understanding is the citation is issued. By law, the citation has to be transmitted to the registered owner within 15 days.
Okay,
The registered owner has up to 60 days within which to respond.
60 days.
Yes. And then beyond that, you know, if they want a court trial, then that sort of drags things out. And the LAPD indicates,
But then that's no longer the vendor, that's then up to the system, the court. So the vendor, once they release that, once that notice goes out, they're now finished. It's the follow-up by other agencies,
Well-
court or whatever.
but the critical component, though, is the video data that is contained within their system. And that's why it's important for us to continue the services with ATS. What we were hoping was going to occur was that LAPD's ITD would be able to acquire that data and to be able to store that data in LAPD's databases, but based on ITD's preliminary review, it appears that that is much more complicated and not cost-effective for us to do this on a short-term basis.
So you given any cost estimate?
From ITD?
Yes.
Somewhere within $250,000 to $500,000, because they don't have the expertise within which to do that.
Okay, how about ATS? What was their, did they give you an estimate or no?
Well, that's what we have received from them is a month-to-month contract cost.
How much a month?
The first month they're proposing $73,000, which seems to be sort of the full range of support services, which we indicated to them is not what we necessarily need.
73,000?
$73,000 a month. And then to go up or down from there?
It goes down.
To what?
I think the second month they're proposing $32,000, and then for each month after that, $10,000. We like the $10,000.
Well, I think that it's going to be unanimous that we conclude the program at the end of this month, that the camera system goes silent as far as continuing enforcement. And then the question is, what term would we subscribe for a cleanup? I think 18 months is obviously extremely long. 12 months is extremely long for those that are currently outstanding. And I think we just have to wipe off the slate to 50,000 people who aren't going to pay. There's no way we're going to collect those. So we need to look at what's reasonable that has been sent out, and those that pay, and the rest of that don't, we just wipe the slate clean. But if they're going to charge $73,000, we're not going to collect that kind of money. That's less than cost neutral. And I don't know if the courts would interfere with the situation where we're just on a part-time basis. And as far as statistics, I also heard about statistics. Police department and DOT have any kind of statistic we can generate, since they're the ones who are in the field. So you're telling me you don't have a resolve on that. So I think maybe that continues, but we need to have some closure on this for tomorrow so it doesn't linger. So what's your recommendation?
Well, I think that the comments you just provided, sir, I think were very helpful. We did emphasize to the vendor in our conference call this morning that the original proposal that they had provided to the police department was in fact $73,000, and we indicated to them that $73,000 was not acceptable, and for them to come back with another option, and we had wanted an itemization of each of the services that we had provided so that we have available to us a menu of options that we could pick and choose. Unfortunately, what they came back with was, again, one lump sum. We also indicated that 18 months is too long, and so, again, I think your comment is very helpful to provide guidance to them, and I am assuming that they're listening to this discussion right now. So I would presume that somewhere, between 6 months and 8 months or 9 months would not be an appropriate time frame.
And I don't know if it's that critical, if the folks, once this gets out, and between the television, radio, and newspaper, unless a person's far away and not catching with the news, people are going to know that there's little to no consequences. And obviously, a lot of those that are sitting there are going to be written off because there's no way sending out another collection letter is going to generate anyone to pay. So I think we have to be honest with ourselves and the public to say, those that receive it between now and the end of the month, if they wish to volunteer pay, we'd be happy to receive that. And those that don't, the program is going to be discontinued. So I think that there's consensus to discontinue the enforcement. And then the question is, and I'll turn to my colleagues who debated this yesterday, I don't want to prolong what you debated yesterday for a long time, is where we go from here on that aspect of cleaning up what's outstanding. So Mr. Parks or Mr. Englander?
I think that is a summation, what we've at length talked about. I think the only thing in my mind that's a little different today is that we, I guess as a council, and I don't recall the exact wording, directed DOT to increase the sequence on these 32 intersections. And one of the things that would be, I believe, very beneficial to the city if these cameras were able to determine were there any changes in the citation totals in that period of time, because if you turn them off, you'd have no ability to know exactly what happened at those intersections. That's the only issue that I see differently today than we had yesterday. And I think it would be important to validate the information about the court that was discussed today, because that's something that was the first time those questions were asked. And those are my only two issues.
Thank you. I have one question regarding the equipment that's currently at the 32 locations. What happens with that equipment?
The contract states that the equipment must be returned to the vendor.
Returned. Okay, well, how is it returned? How is it retrieved, then returned?
There is a task list differentiating between the responsibilities of DOT and the responsibilities of the vendor.
Okay, so who's taking them down?
Well, DOT is responsible for
Removal?
sort of the infrastructure, sort of a backwards of what had occurred. They did the infrastructure where they installed the poles, and that's where the equipment was installed. So DOT is going to be responsible for taking down the poles, and then
Well, I'm not so worried about the poles, because the poles are adjacent to their existing fixtures. The cameras, the flash, that equipment, is that up to the city to remove and then provide?
there's supposed to be coordination between the vendor and
But who goes up there
DOT.
with the wrench and takes it down? That's my question.
I don't have the list with me. Oh, there's Pauline.
You're not going to climb the pole, are you, and take those lights down? We'll give you some tall ladders.
Okay. Pauline Chan from LADOT. What had happened during the installation was that the vendor provided poles, camera brackets, strobe lights, signs, cables. DOT then installed that infrastructure, and after that, the vendor came to the field and installed their cameras and the controller, the computer, into the controller cabinet.
Okay.
And
So who's going to take that equipment out? Who's going
the
to?
proposal made by the contractor so far is consistent with our expectation that they would go out to the field and remove what they had installed, which would essentially be the cameras and the controller. Then DOT would remove the poles, the brackets, and the strobe light, and we will essentially leave the foundation in place. However, we would have to chip off the protrusions from the sidewalk and then cap the pavement, repair the pavement so that it becomes a smooth surface for pedestrians.
What if we left the poles and took everything else away?
That would not alter any kind of operation for the traffic signal. However, I would recommend to remove anything that is a fixed object that's not serving any purpose in the public right-of-way, especially where in tight areas we are obstructing the pedestrian walk area.
Okay. Mr. Englander?
I'm looking at the report. First of all, I want to compliment June on this report, Gibson, our civilian, if you will, because I think she really did a tremendous amount of work on this. And the report states here, according to DOT, that there would be a cost of roughly $155,000 in cash over time, and it further states to remove those poles. And I agree with you that we shouldn't leave useless objects around the community. The $155,000, and that, according to the report, would be detrimental to the high-priority projects, including ARA-funded projects that are underway, and that the department is so severely staffed, this is according to LADOT, that it could jeopardize those projects as well. And so that's why they could only do it on overtime. And that DOT, who did the original installation or investment of $1.5 million in cost to put in the equipment, it would cost another couple $100,000 roughly to pull the equipment out and return it to the vendor. Is that correct?
Right, and that also includes design.
Shed light.
Okay.
Okay. I got others. I don't know if we were done.
So you're still working those details out, Ms. Gibson?
We will have a subsequent conversation with the vendor after this meeting.
And I have a question for the vendor, if they can come forward.
Oh, if they're done with the equipment, they're done.
Okay. regarding this $70,000 request down to 10,000, what type of services need to be provided once that notice goes out to the owner of that vehicle? What other services are provided by the company?
Well, for any of the hearings that are scheduled, we'll provide the evidence packets. We'll continue to review the evidence and review the violations up to the date that the violations stop being issued. Much of that will go into the month of August. Besides the fact that there won't be any new violations, will be very much like a typical month for reviewing the violations that are there. I'd just like to clarify, the proposal that we put forth was a 6-month proposal with an option for a month-to-month after that. And according to the CLA's own report, it says that the LAPD indicates that payments on photo red light citations can lag up to a year or longer. Now, that's from page 2 from a report that was issued just yesterday. It takes typically 90 days before a collection notice is even issued because of the process. The way the process works is that we essentially will review the violation. That violation will then be matched with an owner name. That owner name will then be sent, or that violation will then be sent to LAPD for their approval. The citation will be printed and mailed within 15 days. From that point, the violator has 60 days to respond. There are warning letters that are sent to every violation that's outstanding, and then there is the whole collection process that begins. So this is a long process, and it's why I think over time some of the payment rates have been somewhat misrepresented. It takes time for all of these payments to come in, and it typically can take a year, maybe longer, before the year before's violations are actually rectified.
But once you send that notice out, that is it for you folks. If they don't want to contest the citation, they then decide, the violator decides if they're going to make a payment or disregard.
But the violator can have up to 3 months or longer before they decide to contest that violation.
And how many do contest? What's the percentage that contest?
I don't have that number in front of me. I'm
Do
sure
we have
that's
that?
something we can get for you.
How many actually contest?
I don't know. Mike?
Maybe about 5 to 10%.
5 to 10% contest. They want to go to court, and then you have to show the evidence.
And that's significant. If we're talking about 45,000 violations per year, 5 to 10% is between 4,500 and 2,250 violations, which preparing those evidence packets is time sensitive and labor intensive as well.
I'm not disputing that. What's our conviction rate on those that contest?
That's something I think probably the LAPD.
Those that decide to go to court and contest?
I go to trial on about 5,000 photo red light cases. Not me personally. The photo red light program has about 5,000 cases a year. Of that 5,000, about 1,000 of those will be people that show up to court and the photo does not match the driver, and they either don't know or are refusing to say who the driver is.
They don't have to tell. They don't have to tell.
In which case, the judge will dismiss the citation. So that's about 1,000 of them. The rest of those result in a conviction of some kind, either the person pleading, changing their plea and going to traffic school, or those that go to trial are almost always found guilty. With about a 99% conviction rate once the person goes to trial. The only way they ever lose is if the photo, in the judge's estimation, is not clear enough to identify the driver beyond a reasonable doubt.
And then a number of those go to community service or versus paying the fine?
That I don't know.
I just would also like to add that APS is prepared to offer several options to the city to ensure that the collection is cost neutral, cost effective, that the taxpayers of Los Angeles are never left paying APS for out of pocket for collecting fines that they're not getting revenue from.
And I would just say this in the future, if the courts change their opinion, and this comes back to another RFP, and you're in the bid to process for that, be consideration for what you're doing now, because it could come back again where this program begins anew with a whole new process. In other words, don't burn your bridges.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, sir.
I'm being very candid with you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Englander.
Yes.
Is that semi-extortion or something?
No.
I heard it on the record.
No.
Okay, well then I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there with the extortion in a minute and expand on that, as long as we're asking for favor.
Extortion.
It sounds to me as if this is more of a financial decision. It sounds to me that the will of the council from 2 committee meetings and numerous press events and conversations on the record, that the will of this council will be to end, and it's my support, and I'll just put that on the record as well, that I support ending and terminating enforcement as soon as this contract is up at the end of this month in 5 days. And so 4 days. 4 days. So in 4 days. That I support that, and though also on the record that I would urge all Angelenos to obey all laws, but that we stop issuing those citations. However, after reading, or I should say in addition, after reading the report, this is really a financial discussion. And the discussion is protecting, is exactly what you just said, is protecting the taxpayers and the city of Los Angeles. It sounds to me, and I haven't seen any of these numbers, but to break it down at $73,000 for the first month, based on where we were today, and today we're at, and just put things into perspective, at 32 intersections at $8,000 is how much money? A lot more than 73,000. About 225. So we're going from 225,000 from $8,000 per intersection, basically, and most of the work related to photo red light, the back office work, the getting ready for court cases, the preparing the documents, reviewing the violations. So you're going to continue to do that, even though we won't be issuing any more citations, if that's the will of this council, tomorrow. Absolutely. And that would be then at a cost of roughly the first month, at the highest month, at $2,000 versus the $8,000?
Essentially, that's correct, yes, sir.
For $2,500, if I round up? And over the life of that, and that's if we went 18 months rather than the 6 months that you proposed. Worst case scenario, you're looking at roughly $350,000 if you added all that together.
Actually, the proposal that we put forward actually phased out over time. There were 2 options. One had that $70,000 for the first 2 months, and then dropping to $38,000 the third month, $28,000 the fourth month, $17,000 the 5th month, and $15,000 the 6th month. At that time, then the option would come in whether or not it's cost effective to continue collections. I would also say that looking at the CLA report again, it estimated that of the 65,000 citations remaining, that if only 30% of them were collected, the city would collect roughly $3,065,000 in revenue.
So that's if so 3 million. Well, that's in the report here. That's on page 2.
Correct.
65,000 citations, which is what it says. They keep saying 50,000, but according to the report, there's currently, and that doesn't including this week, 65,000 outstanding citations, of which we've historically been collecting 60%. But if you cut that in half, we're at $3 million in collections based on $157. That's only the city share.
Correct.
Minus the 18% court administration fee, minus all county and state fees. We're at $3,065,000. So to collect $3 million and have that support, does the support also include, a lot of these are residents of the city of Los Angeles, and they have questions about their tickets. Yes. They have questions about wanting to see the video footage. Who do they call?
Yeah, absolutely. That includes continuing to operate our call center, continuing to operate the website that allows the citizens who have received tickets to pay. I will add that when you look at the zip code breakdown of violations, roughly 2/3 of the tickets are given to people who live in Los Angeles, but 33% of them are actually given to people who live outside the city of Los Angeles.
Okay. And it sounds to me, if the numbers make sense, and it's all based on the dollars, that we've got a responsibility to the city to phase out this program, to immediately terminate issuing any more citations effective August 1st, and work something out that is financially responsible. There was one more question that Councilman Zine brought up, and that was the cost of removing the equipment and DOT not having the personnel. And I know that this was a concern of Councilman Zine, so I wanted to put a lantern on this issue. There's still about a cost of $155,000 to $200,000 in that, and we don't have the bodies and the time to do it. I understand, and we discussed earlier in this committee, that the city of LA is the only city out of every large city or any city in the United States that has this program and this equipment that installs it themselves. I'm going to take a leap and ask if we are probably the only city that removes this equipment at the closure of one of these contracts as well. And as the expert and the vendor.
I would say that while it is very rare that cameras are even removed, that in the instance that they are, that it's rare for the city to remove them.
Would it be fair to ask then if there's something we could work out where DOT was okay with it, where we can work it out with the unions so we can keep them working on ARA-funded projects, and we weren't in violation of any contract, that we could work something out where the vendor would be willing to remove the equipment if something was worked out on a month-to-month program as part of the phase-out?
I think that we expect that in the first few months, at least the first 6 months, that there will still be a significant amount of work. I think that the proposal we put forward that had 6 months with a month-to-month after that, that if that was the type of program that the LA City Council decided to go with, that we'd be more than willing to work with them on absorbing some of the costs with removing those cameras.
I don't have anything further.
Let me just ask one thing. Is turning the camera off from usage and removing them one and the same, or can you turn them off and they remain housed?
The cameras can be turned off and remain housed, yes, as well.
And then what is the technology or the timeline if you turn them back on? It's just a matter of switching?
It typically takes a week or two to turn them back on. It will take time to service them to make sure that they still work the way they were meant to work. But we would be more than willing, if it were the council's wishes, to come back and turn those cameras back on at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Well, we already discussed that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the recommendation will be that we will approve the conclusion of the program, terminate the program at the end of this month. And it seems that there's still negotiations taking place with the city and with the vendor on the follow-up. But one of the questions, we've got 50,000, 60,000, I don't know how many are outstanding. People that aren't going to pay, we need to just wipe that slate clean. There's no way we're going to collect those dollars. And the officer's going to come tomorrow and let us know what the court's decision is on the situation where someone doesn't take care of it. But as far as the 72, 32, 15, whatever, that's still up in the air, correct, June?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the month-to-month?
The month-to-month phase down. Because somehow there's clearly citations out there that have to be processed through the end of the month. It's like an airplane's up in the sky, it's going to land. It just doesn't arbitrarily come down, at least it's not supposed to. It takes a gradual descent and it lands. So we're on the descent now to land to make the stop. So while we're going to stop the enforcement, we still have that cleanup to take care of with those that are, I'm sure, issuing today, tomorrow, whenever.
Well, there's a contractual obligation on the part of the vendor to continue to process those citations that are captured through midnight of August the 1st.
And then the question is, after that,
Beyond
what services?
that, I think, is the issue of the level of services that we would require from the vendor. In our discussions with LAPD would be open to absorbing some of the tasks so that those tasks would not have to be borne by the contractor and that the city would have to pay for those additional costs.
Okay.
But certainly that is a policy decision, and if the committee wants to provide some parameters for us as we move forward in negotiations, that would be helpful. Because if you're now also introducing the notion of the contractor performing the, if I can use the word, deconstruction of the poles that DOT has indicated that they're willing to do at $155,000, I don't know how that's going to factor into the cost of the proposal by the vendor. So I think
There's
guidance
still-
from the committee with respect to that issue, I think, would be helpful as well.
Well, let me just say this. What I'd like you to do is to sit down and come up with the best deal for the people of Los Angeles. Whatever is reasonable, whatever is prudent. Obviously, the program's going to, if a recommendation from this committee, I think will be unanimous, as it was yesterday, to terminate the program. And two of my colleagues were on that committee yesterday to direct that the program be terminated. But then there's the cleanup, and I think that's what needs to be negotiated, is what provisions with the police department, DOT, whatever, will be provided. So I would say whatever we can do in the most expeditious manner at the least cost to the taxpayers to have this matter finalized. And if the courts change, and I've been contacted by a legislator that's working on legislation, and if it goes through the Assembly and the Senate and this and that and the other, and the governor signs something and it comes up at a later date, and we do another RFP, then I'm sure you'll be competing for that and see what happens at that time. But as it stands now, we need to then do the cleanup, and we're still working on that. So the parameters, I would say, the best deal we can get with respect to the vendor and to the taxpayers, so we can get the matter cleaned up. But to my knowledge, once that letter goes out requesting the payment and they decide to contest it, we'll need that information. If they discard it, then there's no consequences. And there may be, and we'll find that out with the issue at the court. Other than that, those that haven't been taken care of in the last year, I'm sure they're not going to be taken care of, so we just need to acknowledge those as a write-off.
The only thing I would add is that the call center does get a significant volume of activity with people calling and asking questions, and so that's a function that we perform right here in our
But see, what we will say is we'll give it a certain period of time, and then the call center, as far as we're concerned, shuts down because the program's been discontinued, and the information we're going to disseminate through the media anyway. I mean, the media is very focused on this particular subject. This is like the highlight of the city right now. I mean, Carmageddon's over, and now we got this to deal with.
I'd like to make a motion.
Mr. Englander.
I'd like to make a motion, and
Before that, do you have a comment, Mr. Parks?
No, I would just like to
For the motion.
ask the CLA to negotiate this and bring us back a deal. I don't think we can negotiate it here.
No.
And if it's going to have an impact on general fund dollars, we'd ask you to bring it back to Budget and Finance. And I would hope we'd stop telling the public to stop paying their tickets.
I second that, yes.
What I've said, and I'll make that clear for the record, if you don't pay it, there's no consequences.
I know
That's what I've
like,
said.
but that's like saying don't pay it.
Well, they can pay it if they wish.
So my motion would be then that I would move to adopt the similar motion, the same motion as yesterday in the Budget Committee, that we immediately terminate in accordance with the contract.
Immediately at the end of the month.
Immediately at the end of the month. Right, yes. At the end of the month, at the end of July. Somebody had stated August 1st, midnight.
Councilmember, I have the exact recommendation from the committee, if you'd like me to read
If you
it for the
could,
record.
that would be great, please.
Budget and Finance in yesterday's meeting indicated that they would instruct the city administrative officer and the chief legislative analyst to work with the vendor of the photo red light program, American Traffic Solutions, to negotiate all cost issues and other elements, including equipment removal, for a phased-out approach to the photo red light program and terminate the issuance of photo red light citations as of August 1st, 2011.
Yeah, that we adopt that phase-out motion, correct.
With no specific time phrase other than the termination.
No specific timeframes other than the termination.
Okay. Mr. Parks?
Yeah, I don't think we had the ability to put a time frame until they sat down and discussed it, because we didn't have that material. But that was a brilliant motion.
May I add?
Go ahead.
Respectfully ask that if the negotiations don't work out in favor with respect to the, in favor of the city with respect to the equipment removal, that the council consider allocating part of this revenue up to $155,000.
What revenue? There is no revenue.
That's got to go to the Budget Committee, from my understanding, for
For
revenue
the-
allocation.
Yeah, let's try the negotiation first.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no revenue. It's a loss, not a plus. So that'll be the recommendation of the committee, and that will go forward to the council tomorrow.
Correct, that will be moved forward to council tomorrow, Wednesday, July 27th, in tomorrow's council meeting at 10 a.m.
We have two comments. I didn't
This
even know
is
these
for-
were here. We've got a
this is
couple comments.
Special agenda.
Can you open it with public?
Well, I'm sorry, what?
This will be on a special council meeting agenda.
Okay, tomorrow. I thought these folks already spoke, but here we are on item number 3. I just have these cards. Jay Bieber? Jay, you still here? And then Charles Torito?
I'll wait.
Okay, thanks, Charles. And that'll be our final comment, and then the motion will carry forward. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, JP, probably quick.
Just a couple of quick points. As far as the 90 days is concerned, the extension is worded as 90 days from May 1st, so that actually would be July 30th if you're counting actual days. So just to be specific about that in terms of whatever.
Well, whatever the date is, that's what we're going to go by.
Come up with. And as far as the call center and the website, those are things that they may already have for other places, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that has to be done just for Los Angeles, so that may be something that you want to look into in terms of the...
And that'll be negotiated with them.
Right, okay. And then as far as the ending of the contract, I would just urge this body and also the council eventually to make sure that the wording is such that this contract ends as of whatever date you determine whether...
That's what the motion was, Mr. Englander's motion.
The city attorneys will definitely
thank you.
weigh in on that.
Sorry, thank you.
For clarification, the contract is to end, and then the negotiations to see how they do the cleanup.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so for the record, we are concurring with Budget and Finance's recommendations, except we are not terminating as of August 1st?
Well, we're going to terminate at the date, if it's July 31st. Mr. Fisher, do you know the date? The date, is it July 31st?
Technicality.
Midnight, July 31st?
To stop issuing citations.
So midnight, July 31st will be the concluding date. That apparently is the contract.
So we are concurring completely with Budget and Finance.
Well, if they said that date.
Yes.
Okay,
August 1st.
so we want to make sure it's on that particular date. Okay.
If I may, again, because I just have just a few more moments, to make this clear is that the contract expires, because it's basically it says stop issuing citations. It does not say that the contract expires and contract ends.
Let me clarify. The contract does expire, and we are not going to renew the contract. So the contract expires on that date, July 31st. The contract is expired.
59, sir, if we're talking about a technicality.
Okay, so that's when the contract, we go for the expiration of the contract, and then the CLA's office will work with the vendor to determine the time and issues regarding the cleanup of outstanding matters on those citations that are already outstanding. Is that clear for everybody?
Yes.
59 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Park. This concludes the meeting of the Audit Government Efficiency. Thank you.